Hello, I'm Rick Sinding. It's Monday morning, July 8th, 2019, here at the Eagleton Institute of Politics on the campus of Rutgers University. With us today for the Center on the American Governor is Patti McGuire, a veteran of more than 3 decades of political campaigns and government service here in New Jersey, including the period from 2006 through 2009, when she served as Deputy Chief of Staff in the administration of the state's 45th Governor, John Corzine. Patti McGuire, welcome to Eagleton.
Good morning. Thank you.
So let's start with talking a little bit about yourself, your background, how it was that you got interested and involved in politics and public policy. I know that you grew up in Hudson County, so maybe that's a rhetorical question, but why don't you tell us about it in your own words?
So yes, I did grow up in Hudson County. Both my parents were political activists. They were involved in the reform movement in the 1970s in Hudson County. So at age 13, I learned how to challenge. I started to learn and understand elections. I met people like Mayor Paul Jordan from Jersey City. Mayor DeFino was one of the individuals my parents had been quite supportive of in the reform movement. Got to know people like the late Mayor and Senator Glenn Cunningham, who was a sheriff then or was running for sheriff. So for me, entry into politics was at age 13 in Hudson County. And then from there, I found you could make a profession out of it. And that's what I started to do after I graduated college.
Let's talk a little bit about the reform movement in your hometown, which is Union City.
No, right? West New York is my hometown.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm from West New York.
Okay.
No, lived in Union City.
But you were involved in Union City politics,
I was involved in Union City politics. I was hired in 1990 by Bob Menendez, who then was mayor and assemblyman, and Bruce Walter, who was the commissioner. The both of them were sort of the reformists within Union City politics.
Were you fresh out of school at this point?
Oh, no, I had been working in county government. I had done a fundraising for then County Executive Bob Januszewski.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I had done presidentials prior to that.
Let's go back a little bit then, talk about after college.
Starting
with college.
After college, I was accepted into grad school, but I decided to do the Kennedy for President campaign. And
this would be Ted Kennedy in 1980.
1980.
Okay. The primary campaign against Jimmy Carter.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So there I met people like County Executive Peter Shapiro, Gina Glantz, Fran Ryan, the late Tim Hull. There were a whole group of activists from Essex County who took me in, nurtured me, and it was a great experience. Started graduate school, found out there was an opening on the Carter for President campaign, and then did that race.
So you jumped ship.
Well, general election.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And from there, I ended up doing Joe Merlino for governor. I was taught how to be a scheduler by the famous, the famous sort of Fran Ryan. She taught me how to schedule, and I was Joe's scheduler.
Why Merlino?
Fran Ryan was running the campaign. She was sort of she really was my mentor, and I decided to do that race. I lived in Trenton. Loved Trenton, got to love it even greater through the eyes of the Merlino family, because they had such pride in Trenton, and that I will always carry with me. So I was Joe's scheduler both for the governor's race, so I was about 21 then, 22, and also his scheduler for his congressional race, in which he lost to Chris Smith.
Chris Smith, yeah.
Sort of went home after that and started to do some other races, and then ultimately, I guess, ended up doing the 1987, 86 fundraising for Bob Januszewski, which led me to the 1990 going to work for Bob Menendez and Bruce Walter.
Going to work for, meaning working on their campaigns,
actually
working in government?
No, working in their campaign. So I was hired to be the campaign manager for Bob Menendez's second race for mayor. He was an assembly person then, and Bruce Walter, who was the commissioner. The two of them started an organization called Alliance, and that had been a reform group against Mayor Bill Musto.
Yep.
So I worked for them for quite a few years. Bruce passed away in 1997. Bob ran for Congress in 1992. I ran that race. I was his first chief of staff. I was also with Bob when he became the first state senator who was Latino in the Senate in New Jersey. So I worked for Bob for quite a few years.
Now, you ran the campaign for the Assembly. You ran his campaign for Senate.
I ran his campaign for...
And ran his campaign for Congress.
I
But then you became his chief of staff. You went into government. Is that the first time you went into government?
I was in government prior to that. I was in government under Bob Januszewski. I was director of constituent services, the first ever constituent service office, and then the deputy chief of staff.
Okay, now it sounds to me as though much of your formative years were spent as what we would refer to as a political operative.
Absolutely.
But you also took not only that position in Hudson County government, but now chief of staff to United States congressman.
Yes.
What prompted you? What inspired you to move from the political side to the governmental side?
I think part of that was, the congressman asked me to do it. I think there was enough trust. I was starting up 2 offices for him, both in New Jersey and in D.C. And maybe it's a Hudson thing, we have loyalty, we have friendships. I think that goes a long way, right? Yeah. So I worked for Bob. I worked for Bob for quite a few years, but I left being chief of staff after close to a year.
You were in Washington?
And in New Jersey. I split my time between both. I was tired.
Okay, and after a year?
I went back to political consulting.
And
so I ran Bob's campaigns. I ran things in Hudson County. Bruce Walter was the county chair. So I ran the Hudson County.
And became mayor of Union City, as I recall, after Bob.
Right. And so I ran the Hudson County political operations as a volunteer. But I was also part of the Alliance organization. So I did political work. And then in 1996, I was named the political director for the Clinton-Gore Bob Torricelli race. So I was a statewide political field director for the coordinated campaign. And then after that, I was the coordinated campaign director for Jim McGreevy's 1997 race.
Now, explain what that means. What does a statewide campaign coordinator do?
So in both races, what I did is it entails working with the elected officials throughout the state, whether they are mayors, county executives, freeholders, and the local county political organizations. And so I was responsible for coordinating all of that for pre-election day and election day activities.
Is this primarily meaning getting out the vote?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And so after Clinton Gore and Torricelli, somewhere in one of your bios, I seem to recall seeing that you actually worked for Torricelli, or was that just on his campaigns?
Just on the quick campaigns.
Okay.
I've never worked for Senator Torricelli. And that I just did political work for Senator Torricelli, as I did for Senator Lautenberg. I never worked in government with them.
Oh, okay. So you also did campaigns for Lautenberg?
I did Senator Lautenberg's 2002 when he chose to run.
That was an interesting race.
It was a very interesting race, and that. But the 1997 Governor the McGreevy coordinated campaign was a very interesting race. We came within 1 point of beating Governor Whitman. We had no money as a coordinated campaign, which is the field and the politics. Coordinated campaigns are usually where all the fields and the political activities come from. And so we actually, I think, exceeded expectations that year.
In 97?
Yes,
oh yeah, I
did.
don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah.
I always get these numbers mixed up. 2002, okay, the Lautenberg campaign. Now he was stepping in to succeed Torricelli.
Yes.
And it's probably a very, very well-known fact around New Jersey that those two individuals detested one another.
Yeah, I think their relationship was not very good.
But you had a seamless transition from working for Torricelli's campaign to working for Lautenberg?
The Senate, so that we make that clear, I had been working for John Corzine. Okay, I started working for John Corzine in July of 1999. Most people don't realize that.
As he was considering the idea of running for the U.S. Senate.
He was
already running for U.S. Senate.
He was already running because prior to that I had worked for Bob Menendez, who really wanted that seat, but basically Governor I think the governor's race pending the year later and having someone like John Corzine run sort of, I think, changed the landscape.
Well, there are a lot of people who think what changed the landscape was John Corzine's money.
I think John Corzine's money helped. I think John Corzine also doesn't get enough credit, nor did he ever get enough credit for, I think, understanding the issues much better than people think.
Oh, I don't think I've not heard many people describe him as not understanding the issues. I think certainly coming in 1999 and 2000. When he ran in the primary, and outspent Jim Florio by like 35,000 to 1 or something.
Right.
So, but well, let's go back to how did you get introduced to Corzine?
I was working then for Bob Menendez. Bob was an was a congressman
who was interested in running for the Senate.
I was doing all his political stuff. So I had come in after 1997, after the McGreevy for governor. I went back to the Union City team. My mentor, who was Bruce Walter, was dying. And so I stayed in Union City. I did the re-election race, the race that beat Brian Stack at that year. Mm-hmm. Rudy Garcia became mayor. Okay. I worked for Bob then after that, in preparation for a potential Senate run. Mm-hmm. So now building the statewide base, building relationships. Bob had a wonderful labor record, expanding that labor record. When John Corzine got into the race, that changed things, and so an opportunity came that I could go work for John Corzine. He had asked me, would I work for him, knowing that Bob was not going to run.
Oh, okay. At that point, Menendez had made the decision not to run.
Right.
Okay.
He was not going to run, and so then Corzine asked me if I would join his campaign.
And you had you met him before?
Yes, I had met him a couple of times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because of his...
meeting with Bob, speaking with Bob Menendez, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what did you do in Corzine's 2000
Build the
primary?
Political base. My job was to build a political operation and a field operation, and I hired the appropriate people to work with me to build a political base.
And did you work in both the primary and general in 2000?
Yes, I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, I did. And then I went on to be the state director for John Corzine.
And, that kept you in New Jersey as opposed to moving down to Washington.
For a year.
Well, again, wow, that's interesting. So it was a year for
little
Menendez.
Bit less than a year, yeah.
And it was a year for Corzine.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm. Was this just to sort of ease the transition, to make sure that things got set up properly, and then move on back to doing
to the things I really wanted
campaigns.
To do, which was political campaigns at that point. Yes, that's a really great assessment.
Tell me what your early impressions of Corzine were based upon that.
I can tell you
exactly
what they are. And I'll never forget this. So I'm probably working there about a month. We're going out to do a series of events. And I'm driving in my car. And we're back and forth and talking, and something...
Did he have a seatbelt on?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
And I don't know, I must have looked at him and said, are you really the CEO of, were you really the CEO of Goldman Sachs? Because he was a gentleman who was, who I found very approachable. Someone that could talk to me or vice versa. Sort of, you looked and thought, well, God, this is sort of different image of somebody who you would think of running a corporation of the magnitude of Goldman Sachs. That always struck me about John Corzine, was that I always thought he was approachable. I always thought you could have a conversation. I never felt that there was any sort of boundaries in conversations. So for me, I mean, I did an enormous amount of traveling with him, because we were building a political base, right? We were the team that was going out there talking to legislators and mayors and convincing people that he was the right choice.
And you were doing scheduling?
Scheduling was underneath me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I hired people. I had a team of people. Mm-hmm. Joe Tyrell, who was the field director. There was a whole bunch of folks that were hired.
Now, how does growing up and cutting your teeth in the rough and tumble world of Hudson County politics, which can make you a lot of friends, but can also make you a lot of enemies, how do you parlay that into becoming a statewide figure, working for a person running for governor, without alienating an entire group of the people in Hudson County who are on the other side from where you were.
Well, so in John Corzine, at the point, nobody in Hudson had made a decision, and your word is your word, right? Nick Sacco, not complicated. Nick Sacco is a guy, his word is his word. That's how he operates. That's the politics I grew up on. If I gave you my word, it was, if I had to walk back because I couldn't, you understood why. But most times, it's your word. It's who you are. It's your reputation. Politics is not as difficult as people want to make it out to be. It's about relationships. Right?
Well, and you had relationships, clearly, with the reform group in Hudson County. I'm wondering what the establishment group in Hudson County...
But they were the establishment now. The Nick Saccos of the world were the establishment. Nick Sacco played baseball for my father. They were the establishment now. It was more about, were they interested in a player like John Corzine? Because here you had this Goldman Sachs guy who never had any political background. People didn't understand that he and his family had given money to certain charities throughout New Jersey and nationally. They didn't know that, right? So there's this guy, and it's about relationships, right? Do I know you? Do I know enough about who to surround you? Remember, that's an important piece to a lot of elected officials.
So a lot of your responsibility, it seems to me, was introducing Corzine to people whom you knew.
Was building a statewide political base, north and south.
What did you do in that first year in setting up the state office? Was it in Newark?
It was in Newark. Christy Davis and Stephen Goldstein were the campaign managers, and I was brought in to sort of build the basis, right? So it was hiring people and starting to move John Corzine around the state, work with county organizations, work with different constituency groups, trying to put us in a position for a primary fight, which we knew was going to happen, right?
No, so I'm not sure I'd call it a fight, but...
Okay, but, the line, getting the line or not getting the line, doing conventions. People don't realize that in New Jersey, a lot of the counties have conventions. And it's calling delegates, and it's sending letters, and it's putting, together small parties with certain delegates or with the delegates and that. So that all went on. That got us to the primary, and then got us to the victory.
During that first year that you were working for him, that would be 2001, did you already know that he was going to run for governor in 2005?
No, absolutely not. And actually didn't support that idea.
Oh.
Don't forget, Jim, no one saw what was going to happen, or Jim's decisions. No.
Oh, so the assumption would have been that McGreevy would have been running for re-election in 2005.
Absolutely
I see.
not.
Okay.
There was not in anybody's mind. It was us, going forward from where we were in 2000, for the Senate stuff and building the relationships. Don't forget, he was DSCC chair. You don't decide to do those things without sort of thinking that that's where your future is.
Yeah. So 2002 to 2004, what campaigns are you involved in at that point?
I did the Torricelli piece, which then became the Lautenberg.
In 2002.
I started my own business called Front Porch Strategies.
I saw Front Porch Strategies. I was wondering what that was.
Okay, Front Porch Strategies was a company designed to do grassroots. I love grassroots politics. I like grassroots organizing. As a lobbyist today, some of the things I love to do is much more grassroots driven than it is anything else. And so that was the focus of the company, was to, to see if there was a desire. I did my political stuff, but to sort of make it a little bit more business driven. And I did. And it, but my focus was the political stuff.
Were there more people involved in Front Porch Strategies than you?
No.
Okay.
There was not, just me.
I got you. 2004, you did the Kerry campaign.
Yes.
Again, statewide coordinator in New Jersey. Seems to be your calling.
Yes, yes, but I want to make sure that I acknowledge A.J. Sabbath, because A.J. Sabbath was my co-partner and very much was the player who helped me with the day-to-day stuff. Because it was a lot to do, not a lot of money. Senator Corzine asked me to do it. I did it.
Oh, I see. That's how.
Yes.
So it was a Corzine invitation. Oh, well, because he was running the Senate, the DSCC at the. I see. Okay. Now in 2004, well, it's that same year, McGreevy resigns. Dick Cody becomes acting governor, and that we now refer to him because of legislation that's passed since then as governor.
Yeah, always do.
And now Corzine has got to start thinking about the notion of running for
Right,
governor.
and I think, I think he thought about it, and I think people encouraged him to run.
Were you one of them?
No, I'm not.
Interesting.
I was not. I mean, I think he would have been a great senator, and that's really kind of where I thought his sort of place was. But he chose to run, and we were all in.
Why did you think he would make, a better senator than governor? Or I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No. It's, if you ask me where I thought his fit was, right?
Mm-hmm.
I thought his fit was better in the Senate. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask me about Senator Menendez, I think Senator Menendez would have been a great governor because he understood state government, understood local government so well. That's my personal. As I thought, God rest his soul, the late, Bob Franks would have been a wonderful governor, right? And I think there was an article about both of them in the early '90s. About the future of the Republican and Democratic parties and could they be the next gubernatorial candidates. Two men who understood government, local government in particular, which is important.
I think the article you're referring to might have been something called 9 for the 90s.
It could have been.
Where 9 people who were identified as the likely leaders of New Jersey in the 1990s was published, and none of them turned out to be the leaders of New Jersey in the 1990s.
Isn't that something?
Okay. The reason I bring this up is because I wrote most of that article in New Jersey Reporter magazine. So
I think you know what I'm referring
yeah,
to
I do.
then.
I know
right.
exactly what you're referring to.
And part of that, as you recall, has to do with the fact of what the congressional district looked like for Bob Menendez. And that was Bob Frank's joke to me all the time. Patty, come on, look at this. And I'd be cursing him out saying, I got this damn district, right? But it was how big the district was and how wide it went and the breadth of which the people that you're involved in.
But we could talk about redistricting for a long, long time, especially in today's political climate. The 2005, well, no, let me ask you, even before we get to the 2005 election, what was your relationship like with Dick Cody?
Oh, it's great, and I hope he feels the same way. We've always had a very good. I actually did some work for Dick. Governor Cody had asked me more than one time to join his staff. We've always had a fine relationship. We may not always agree, but I would think he would say to you, as I feel about him, that we have a nice relationship.
Was there any fallout in terms of that relationship when you decided to work for Corzine for the governorship in 2005?
I think it changed it. I think it changed it a little bit. I don't think that Governor Cody treated me disrespectfully when I was in the front office. I actually think he felt like he had an ally. But I think it's very clear that I was very active in helping secure the needed support for then Senator Corzine.
All right, so 2005 campaign. Let me guess, statewide campaign coordinator? No.
Consultant. And was there from the day we said go, and was the consultant to the campaign.
Paid or volunteer?
Paid. Paid. I'd love to tell you that I'm rich.
Explain to me the difference between what a consultant did and what the statewide coordinator would do.
I wasn't doing the everyday, I was there every day, but I wasn't doing the overall everyday stuff. So there were other people, and that's what you want in politics. You want to bring in other people to be empowered to start learning how to do things. So I was a consultant, and so I would help with the field and the politics, clearly helped if there were problems with certain elected officials, making sure certain things were in place, things like that.
Okay, and were you instructing younger staff on how to do that, or were you actually going out and doing it yourself, or both?
A little bit of both. How's that?
Okay. When did then Governor-elect Corzine approach you about joining his administration?
I had come back from vacation. I had no intentions of going into the administration. I'd come back from vacation, and he called me. He said, you're going to come down to the transition office. Since I was a lobbyist, though Front Porch Strategy was a grassroots company, I made sure I registered so no one could ever say anything. the late Dick Leone felt if you were a lobbyist, you should not be involved in the transition. Very different than everybody else's. So I went down, saw Governor Corzine, and he had a very straight ask, which was, would you come into the administration? And the answer was no. Help you in any way you want, not interested. And then the push came, whether it was Maggie Moran, Maggie and I had worked together in the past and or himself, the governor, to make sure. So they put the push on to take this responsibility, which by you should just know would be handling the entire legislature, and by you should just know scheduling would be underneath you, and you should just know advance will be underneath you. Which means briefings are underneath you.
Right.
Which means you need to take a long vacation. So in taking the offer, I did. And it was the best time I ever had in my life.
So you don't regret that decision?
I absolutely do not regret
Well,
it.
it's very interesting because there are two takeaways that I get now. The first one is that you really think that John Corzine should have stayed in the United States Senate. And the second is that you were very reluctant to join his administration.
Yes.
But the power of his persuasion and Maggie Moran's.
It was right. It was Maggie. It was now you're going on 8 years. I worked for governor. This wasn't a person I just met. There's a man I worked for since 1999, right? So yeah, the persuasion of him and Maggie, and for me, best decision because it brought in who I was.
Which is scheduling, legislative relationships.
Policy.
Policy.
Because all of a sudden, I went from being a political person in your eyes or other people's eyes to now doing an enormous amount of policy.
But there's a policy shop. Wait, separate, right?
Yeah, but a lot of that stuff happened downstairs. You're going to go out and Senate President Sweeney would tell you that. I got to learn a lot. And so the policy became something. You can't do legislation. So when Lisa Jackson says, you know what, it's time to do a site remediation plan, and we should be the second state, Massachusetts being the first.
She was the Commissioner of Environmental Protection at the time.
Right, DEP. And she comes forward, and she meets with the governor, and she wants to do this. Well, I'm in the room, right, the policy person, but then Lisa's the real policy person because she understands this. So she's saying, let's do it. Now we've got to craft a strategy. You can't craft a strategy unless you understand the issue. I can't pick up a phone or go and do anything unless I understand the issue and unless I understand the policy. So I took it upon myself to make sure, and I learned that from Bob Menendez, that anything I'm going to do, I need to understand it. And so what I did is on big issues that I was handling to get legislation done, I got to know the issue.
Most of what you had done before this was to convince people that the person whom you were working for was the best candidate for a position, as opposed to why his or her particular policy on education or environment or
there
whatever.
May be times where you would have those conversations, and I think most people who do politics are not just single-laned. You need to give us, I think people need to give us more credit. But here I'm sitting, when you're going to do a piece of legislation, and you know that the environmental community is going to come after you, and you know you're going to have legislators that are going to be questioning, you need to have strategy. But you got to be able to articulate. So all of a sudden, policy becomes a major piece.
Were there particular areas? Now I know that there were 3 deputy chiefs of staff, and this triumvirate of women, you and Maggie Moran and Janine LaRue. How did you divide up your responsibilities?
It wasn't how we divided it up. It's sort of how the governor and how it was sort of put in place. We each had different sort of jurisdictions. Maggie did like cabinet and labor. I did legislature, and ultimately budget became underneath me, meaning that I worked, that's Brad and I worked hand in hand.
Brad Abelow.
On the, Brad Abelow on that. And then the other pieces, which are scheduling, because he's scheduling advanced and briefings, which are tied to one item, came underneath me. Janine had appointments, mayors, county government, like we each had different pieces. We got along great, communicated very well. and made sure that if I got something that Janine needed to have, or vice versa, we shared our information all the time.
Were there particular subject areas in terms of policy where each of you were involved, or did you run the gamut for all legislation regardless of subject?
I did all the legislation.
So you had to learn an awful lot about the operations of state government. And I used the site remediation from DEP as an example, but there must have been hundreds of legislative initiatives that required you to have.
But legislative initiatives that come from the front office, right? So there'll be legislation that is dropped by a legislator that at some point toward the end of it going through a legislative process, they're going to ask the front office our thoughts. Sometimes we will voice in earlier, and sometimes we didn't. What we did establish, which I don't think has happened since, is that every Wednesday we would meet Bill Kastner, then Bill Caruso, Assembly, Democrats, myself from the governor's office. I brought one or two people with me from council, whatever, and then Kathy Crotty,
right.
AJ Sabbath, Pete Camerano. We'd meet every Wednesday, faithfully, at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon to go through stuff. We don't always agree, and you all know there were many times, but I think we all respect each other, which is just that's absolutely true. But I mean, we all at least knew what we were all thinking.
How often did you have to go back to the governor and ask him, what are you thinking about this particular thing after that Wednesday meeting?
Well, I think there were things that I think it's almost vice versa. So I'll give you an example. Before we even came into the administration, I asked leadership, once I decided I was going to take the job, and others, what about doing an elected public advocate? I'm sorry, public...
The comptroller?
Comptroller, I'm so
Okay.
sorry.
Yep,
Comptroller,
sorry.
right, the public comptroller. And the answer back, no.
From whom?
Leadership, individuals,
Okay,
just members.
Had Corzine already talked to you about this idea?
Yeah.
Okay, all
Right, we
So
kinda knew.
you were feeling them out on
Right,
whether, okay,
we
gotcha.
talked about it during the campaign.
Okay.
So, answer back is no. Now, I thought it was a great idea because I also think it gave an opportunity for women to run. More elected places put women, which are always good in New Jersey.
Although the comptroller eventually was not a woman.
That is true. It was not. The bottom line to it, the answer was no. Not really interested in doing elected, right? So you sort of pick and choose.
Oh,
You
I see, an
decide.
elected comptroller.
Oh, yeah, that's what we talked about during the campaign.
Oh, okay.
We talked about...
That morphed into an appointed comptroller.
Because that was the best that we could get.
I see.
So you sort of make decisions on where you think you want to pick your fights and what's the most important things, right? Because at the end of the day, got a lot of things going on at one time.
Well, the first fight was that first budget.
Yeah.
Okay, and that when you mentioned that budgetary issues came under you.
Well, they didn't come under me. They fall under you if you're doing the legislature, right?
Okay,
I don't
right.
do the budget. The Treasury does it. The departments do it. But now, when it gets to that last month, when people are talking and we're starting to talk about stuff, clearly I'm very engaged.
Walk us through those first 6 months leading up to the failure of the legislature to pass a budget by June 30th, and the first shutdown of any type for 5-6 days. What happened? I mean, there was a clear disagreement between the Assembly and the Senate, both run by Democrats, and the governor's office. I mean, there were 3 different budgets kicking around.
Right. So there was we presented our budget in February. I believed it was the end of February, beginning of March. It was the first budget. You always get the extension. You always get the latest date possible. Okay, so, and to be frank with you, there was conversations going on, but I can't remember, and I can't tell you that I think there was much negative per se until we started to hit maybe to the middle of May toward the end of May. Then as people begin to focus on the budget and that, all of a sudden, things started to go a little bit, things started to, I think, change a little bit. Now, for me, unfortunately, my mother, who was in her mid-80s, had to have emergency brain surgery. And so as I'm dealing with this, and then ultimately get subpoenaed by Governor Christie for that time Attorney General Christie, for my records, and that I'm dealing with my mother so I'm sort of missing the first 8 to 9 days in June. So when I get back, things are now still not very good. Governor Governor Cody is very clear he's with Corzine on the budget stuff, right? So we have an alignment with the Senate, but not an alignment.
He's still Senate president.
He is the Senate president, not an alignment with the Assembly, right?
Why?
Listen, I think there's a whole host of reasons. I think that there are certain things that they wanted, the tax piece that they wanted to be done differently. I think there was a part of them wanting to test Corzine. I can probably think about 30 of different things.
Well, that's
right?
the piece of it that I'd like to pursue is the idea of testing Corzine.
Okay.
There was clearly a belief among some rank and file Democrats that this guy is not a New Jersey guy.
Right.
Doesn't know New Jersey, doesn't understand New Jersey,
Some
and we're going to show him that we're a co-equal branch of government. Was that a major component of what was going on in the Assembly?
Listen, I think there have been times throughout pre the budget, okay, that you would get that he's an outsider, we need to be respected, we need to be spoken to as an equal branch. And I would say to them, and I'll say to them to this day, they were spoken like they were. They had access at every time. Those chose, some chose not to, okay?
Okay.
So the bottom line to this is, I do think people chose to test him. So 10 days before the budget's due, Governor Cody, Senate President Cody, is clear he's with Corzine. The offer is the same to the Speaker, who's Speaker Joe Roberts. The decision was not to do. And my assumption is it was to test us.
Was it also a North-South issue? Joe Roberts was from South Jersey.
I understand what Joe Roberts, I hate this conversation about North-South.
I do too.
Because I have lived it for a long time. I mean, as somebody who's been around New Jersey politics for a long time, who actually has a great affinity to many, to this day, legislators in South Jersey and to some of their political operatives. I don't think this was just a North-South. I think this was a test of Corzine.
Oh no, I would never suggest that it was just North-South. I was wondering whether North-South was in fact part of the equation.
I think it was let's test John Corzine, let's test Dick Cody.
Okay. Well, you finally did get the budget through 6 days or 7 days into July. And at that point, could you breathe a sigh of relief, or did you all look at what was coming up for the next year's budget and realize this thing is going to be with us for 4 years?
We had made there were a couple of things that had to be fixed that weren't really, I think, mistakes that we may have made. I think that people don't always understand the part the Republicans played in making sure that the Democrat Assembly didn't pass the budget. That was a big thing. And that was a big piece of Joe Malone and his team of those legislators staying with Corzine to make sure that the Assembly didn't pass a budget out. Because if they did, then it takes into a different personality.
Well, explain what you mean. The Democrats had a majority in both houses.
Except that in the Assembly budget, Joe Cryan and Bill Payne, I don't know who else did not vote. Both of them did not stand with Democrats. And then Joe Malone, Frank Lee, Allison Littell McCose,
Right.
and Kevin O'Toole supported Corzine. For the budget. They were never going to vote for the budget, but not to have the Assembly pass out their own budget. The Assembly was attempting to pass out their own budget, which was different than what Governor...
I see. So this prevented the Assembly from actually introducing or passing its own budget?
Introducing not introducing, passing out of the Assembly budget their own budget.
So the Assembly was stalemated itself.
Oh, it was for hours and days.
Okay. And what are you doing all this time?
I don't know. I'm just sitting there having I'm doing a lot of work. Work that I should be doing.
Dealing specifically directly with legislators, I assume.
Yes, I always did. There's not one legislator that could ever tell you that they didn't have open access to me. And by that I'm meaning me, if the governor was there and he wasn't sitting in the meeting, he saw any legislator who walked through. And so, yeah, we were talking to the Republicans a lot. We were talking to the Democrats a lot. And Governor Corzine was very clear. I'll close this. I'm not. I'm not going to be pushed around.
Did you bring a cot into the office to sleep in? Like
I
he
did
did
not
or?
bring a cot into it, but I will tell you that it was not it wasn't the best place to stay. But we stayed I stayed in the hotel except for the night, the last night, and that. But yeah.
All right. So the budget is finally approved, adopted, and now you move on to other activities of government, and then all of a sudden in April of 2007, I keep getting these dates mixed up, the governor has a near fatal automobile
So let's
accident.
step back, because I think there's something that's really pivotal to who John Corzine is and what this administration was really about. School formula funding.
I thought you were going to say the death penalty.
No.
Because the death penalty came earlier, didn't it, before the...
I don't remember.
I'm not sure.
It was a Ray Lesniak piece on that. That was not something it was an issue, but it wasn't something I dealt with very much. School formula funding, on the other hand, really was.
Okay.
And that was, to me, the real pivotal about what New Jersey is, and I think how much we changed, and people didn't see this change.
Well, talk about getting down into the details of policy. I can't think of anything that's more demanding than figuring out the formula for public school
So the
financing.
commissioner and her staff were magnificent. Heather and Jan Ellen Duffy in particular, who took the lead role, were just fantastic. So, and I will give Governor Corzine a lot of credit. So when you ask what we're doing, so in July is when we said we're going to attempt to really get school formulas funded.
Right after the first budget.
Oh, yeah.
So this is 2006, July 2006.
Right.
Okay.
We're going to really try to do school formula funding. So he starts meeting with his team.
At this point, just to provide some historical perspective, there had been, dating all the way back to the administration of Governor Cahill, lawsuits brought against the state funding formula, and at virtually every step of the way, the Supreme Court found that what the legislature had done did not meet the constitutional requirement of a thorough and efficient system of public education. So you were, at this point, like every administration before you, under the gun to come up with some changes to the funding formula.
I'm going to say this a little bit differently to you. I don't think we were ever under the gun. I think it was a vision. I think it was something we saw during the campaign. It is something that people spoke to us about from every walks of life, black, brown, white, Willingboro, Edison, Hamilton, and that. It's about taxes, it's about my kids. It's about how school districts, for many years, which I'll call old suburbs, were not seeing a cent of money from New Jersey at all. 2%, 1% at best. Okay, and then you start looking and talking to people, and you realize it's a really big issue. It's bigger than just we think it is, right? So again,
it's bigger than just 30 districts that had.
It's much bigger than very good. It's much different, and it is about the quality of education. It's about what people are willing to pay and why that zip code changes. And actually, a great person was McKeon. McKeon looked at people and said, "I've got a growing community, minority community in West Orange. And guess what? They can't get anything because they live in West Orange, right? They live 5 minutes, it's making people understand that people live outside of those zip codes, the Jersey City, Newark. So in saying all this, it was about, can we do something? Can we impact a change with X amount of dollars? And how do we do it? And why are we doing it? And why I would always say that the commissioner and her staff should always get the credit. It was the decision, though, of Corzine, let's try to do this. So we went from once a week to 3 times a week meeting, and people, I've got to know enough, right? The commissioner's going to be with me, but I got to know enough because I got to, right? Because now, so.
Well, you've got to go out and sell it to the legislature, right?
With the commissioner and the governor. I mean, the governor sold his stuff because the governor understood it. You asked him where everything was, he could tell you. So you took your lead team to sell it, and then we're told, like a couple of days before, well, the Assembly's going to let 10 Democrats off the bill. 10 Democrats off the bill. It's our bill. 10 Democrats. Might have been 8 at the end of the day. And luckily, with late Lita DeCroce and Joe Malone, we were able to come up with the Republican votes because this was their district. These were their districts also. This wasn't just a Democratic conversation. This was a New Jersey conversation. But the conversation was this: it's not perfect. We're going to have to go back and we're going to have to tackle special needs. It's not perfect. Does everybody have the backbone to go back in and say, we got to make some changes? See, New Jersey's not known for that. We do something, we should never touch it again because we're all so perfect, right?
Well, Commissioner Davey, whom I interviewed recently, spent a lot of time talking about special needs and how important that was.
She absolutely did. We couldn't do it in this round. But she was committed, as the governor was, to in the second piece to the school formula funding, because that was the weak thing. That's the big money piece. How do we do it? How do we put it together? So the conversation is about, this isn't perfect. I want you to vote for this because it's going to help a lot of towns and a lot of students, but it's not perfect. Got to trust us. Trust, relationships.
How much of dealing with the legislature on an issue like this is singling out exactly what it means to every town and every taxpayer in a particular legislator's district?
It is critical how it impacts towns and the kids, meaning the monies. I'm not going to get into all the tax pieces as much as the money needed for those kids. So in Hamilton, which had been starving for ages, Ewing, Edison, that first year, they did really well. The year the Corzine lost, but it was the first.
Was Bill Baroni in the legislature?
Bill
must have
voted
been a supporter
Bill
of
voted
it.
for it.
Yeah.
Bill voted for it, as Joe did. Jen Beck voted for it. These were Martha Bart was one of my last votes in the Senate. Diane Allen didn't. I was sad about that because I'd always hoped that she would, because she had 11 of 13 towns that got more money, the river towns. You know, the working class, right?
Right.
So, so you take an issue like this, right? And so it is. So I can tell you an incident that happened in Hudson. I had Mayor Healy yelling at me, and I know Mayor Healy for years, screaming at me. The state troopers are like, oh my God, this is crazy. I got Nick Sacco on the phone, and then Mayor Turner saying there's something, we're not gonna vote for it, there's a problem. I do a call, I get the commissioner into my office, get them all on the phone. There was not a mistake she made, they had a mistake. They were fine once she articulated everything, and that's about her credibility, okay? Got their votes, Mayor Healy, hear you, goodbye. But those are the things you did, right? You had to, and it was her credibility. The commissioner, I think, stepped up and beyond her boundaries to make this work, which I think is something that people should always realize about her and about what she did. She did a tremendous job. And that because it's fine for me to talk about it and me to be with the legislator, but to have the commissioner walk through it and go through it in that, it's the world of a difference in that. And I give her so much credit for that.
Beyond the question of which districts got how much money and how you could sell it from the standpoint of it benefiting a particular legislator, how much horse trading was there involved?
There wasn't. You can't horse trade that much because you got a formula, right? Because if you tweak it here, it's there and there. So there was not much that went on of that. I think we ran a couple of different runs. We may have changed a couple of little things, but this is the problem. When you say one has got to be one, it's got to be one. Because you can't make it one with an A next to it, because then it hurts. You know, you just can't do that.
Well, without changing the formula, are there ways that you could tell a particular legislator that yes, his favored political operative or relative would be appointed to a particular board or commission if you got that if you got that vote?
If you got that vote. So I think what you're asking me is, did I do anything different for those members who supported this piece of legislation? I, Patti McGuire, did not do anything personal for members that voted for this piece of legislation. I mean, I'm going to be real clear about that. It is very well known that the Republicans were very much thanked for their support on the budget and on stuff, but nobody did a horse trading of this or that. The appointments are the appointments, and they get done, and they're approved by the governor and stuff like that. I mean, you know, I'm very well aware of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't think we have a Superior Court judge that I get. No, I mean,
I understand.
what I guess what I'm trying to say is there was very little about horse trading on stuff. I mean, I must say that to you. People nominated, senators nominated, both Democrats, Republican, normal process went on. That's really went on. And actually, we were criticized for not being smart enough and not doing enough of that. So actually, that is something that was more of a negative than positive under the Corzine administration.
From the perspective of legislators who wanted things.
Well, it's not even wanting stuff. There's boards that need to be filled.
Right,
I don't see. I don't look at things about wanting. It's about if there's boards that are open and that people are willing to serve, and they have people. And also the general public, because we clearly put quite a few general public. I know Governor Christie did too. There were people from the general public I guess I don't look at it as horse trading.
Were you involved in the asset monetization initiative?
I was not involved much except for when it became present to all of us, like when the governor came and Brad and those guys came to discuss it. That's when I knew more about it, right?
Did you understand it?
Not very much. Now, okay, but so now it's funny, right? Because we joked, was the messenger wrong? Was the message wrong, right? So was it a combination of both? Should we have gone out and said, listen, the future looks like this, and we think other states and other countries sell roads, make money, they maintain it. Maybe we should have handled this differently, right? But the governor was very focused. It was a big thing of the governor's, and then the car accident occurred.
Yeah.
Right. So that was, we could say it 10 different ways.
Well, in fact, he hired Bobby Franks to go out and sell it for him, right? I mean,
Bob Franks thought it, because Bob Franks understood transportation, right? So the concern was, what are our roads going to look like? How are we going to fund them? How are we going to fund other transportation needs?
Like New Jersey Transit.
Thank you. What are we going to do in the future? Probably the messenger wasn't right, meaning Corzine.
Well, it's almost a Republican kind. It's a private. Much of it was privatization.
Oh, it is.
Which is very much a Republican issue, not a Democratic.
Right, but I also think, and I can't speak for Bob Franks, but I also think he saw the horizon of how do you finance things, how do you keep a state moving ahead, grow an economy, and as you know today, July 8th is 13 trains down. Right, or 13 trains not moving. It's a problem.
Oh yeah, it's a major problem.
It is.
The accident is what stopped it.
Listen, I don't know what stopped it.
In its tracks. So to
I mean,
speak.
that I'm going to leave to Brad Abelow and Maggie, who were much more involved in it than I was. I sat through, a couple of briefings because it was long before it was going to be public. Look, I think my concerns were how we were going to sell this. What are we going to really do? Privatization to large corporations is not something that most New Jerseyans are comfortable with. So the question really was, should we have sold the problem and then come back,
right.
Say these are things we can look at?
Yeah. The accident. Tell us about your recollection of that day and the immediate aftermath.
If I'm not mistaken, it was Lisa Jackson and Maggie Moran and myself. I don't know if Janine was with us. We're in Atlantic City. We were at a convention. The big things we were able to do. It might have been the League of not the League of Municipalities. Might have been the counties, the League of the County Convention or something. We were down in AC. And that's when we got the call.
It was in April, so it wouldn't have been the League of Municipalities.
No.
November,
It might have been
so.
the county, the conference.
Okay.
We were down in Atlantic City, I can tell you that much.
Okay.
And that we weren't gambling. So we had to be there for a reason. And neither Maggie or I did a lot of, we didn't do traveling, meaning like outside or whatever. So it was definitely in Atlantic City. we were told about the accident. I don't think we knew the severity immediately. We headed out.
You got a call. I mean, the accident
We got a call from
was
Tom
when he
Shea.
was on his way from Atlantic City back to
right.
to
So wherever,
Brunswick. So-
it'd be really nice to know why I was in Atlantic City, right? God, you can
well,
tell.
presumably for the same reason that
Right,
he was.
right,
Yeah.
right. And I can tell you, Janine was at Drumthwacket with the
Right,
Rutgers.
with the Rutgers women's basketball team.
Thank you for making me,
Yeah.
reminding me. And I believe it was Lisa, I think it was Tom Shea texted Maggie to tell her that an accident had occurred. And then I think people came up to us in Atlantic City to say that they had just gotten a call or something that Corzine was in a bad accident. I'm not sure. We left very early the next morning. I'm not sure we knew the severity. We went to the governor's office. We went to our job.
Your jobs.
Right.
And when
very
did-
early, like 6. We were in by 6:30 or something.
And when did you learn of the severity?
We might have that morning known more,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just trying to think back. We probably that morning had a clearer picture of what went on,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that and I'm saying that I think we left very early AC though, so maybe we knew even then.
Now, we've heard in previous interviews, I would say, not necessarily conflicting stories, but certainly different stories about the relationship between then acting Governor Cody and the real interior part of that front office,
Yeah, right.
and how closely, or not very closely, you all worked together.
It was difficult. I didn't feel it directly because I had a little bit of different relationship with Governor Cody, but I think he made it well known very fast, I'm in charge kind of thing. And I think for us, for all of us, we were still in shock because I think at that point, we didn't know if he was going to survive, right? So I think that there was now, I think others would know more than I because I would not have been the person that Governor Cody would have spoken to. I didn't do operations. I wasn't the chief of staff. So, and I don't know if Tom was even available because I think Tom may have been down
Tom
at
Shea,
Tom
chief
Shea
of staff,
at the
yeah.
hospital, right? Right, because Tom still was. No, maybe Brad still was. I'm trying to think now, but there clearly was. No, Tom was it. There clearly was. An uncomfortable period of time.
Did it impede the functioning of state government?
No, everyday government, no. At least I don't believe it did. And I don't think I'm that naive. Okay. I mean, look, people are going to go to work every day. I mean, most middle management and most state employees go to work every day and do their jobs, whether, whoever is there.
Well, I think a lot of people, anybody who's ever worked in a governor's office knows that half the time or more is spent dealing with the crisis of the day as
Right.
opposed to a broader policy
Right.
initiative.
That I think is absolutely true. It's the crisis of the day or the crises of the day and stuff like that. So I don't believe it impacted at all what went on a daily basis.
And as far as any significant legislative initiatives are concerned,
Nothing.
that just
Well, it would
awaited the governor's return.
Right. I mean, I hope people understand. I mean, each governor has an opportunity, he or she, to decide on what they believe are their top issues that they want to. You vote, you sign a bill, but you make a decision on what your top things are, things that you really want to try to get through that come from your office, that are developed from your office, right? Versus legislation that comes to you,
Right.
and you just sign. It's not negatively, but you're just signing it.
Was paid family leave one of the initiatives that came out of the
Yes.
administration?
Yes.
And how did that work?
Yeah, the governor spoke about that when he was running, and Senate President Sweeney, then Majority Leader, I believe, dropped the original bill. It got changed because there were the
It
governor.
sort of became a partial paid family leave, as I
Well,
recall.
there were, and the negotiations of the more business, I assume you're talking about 25 employees and below.
I think that was
right.
and, well, and
That was in- that
and it
was
was
a-
up to a maximum of a certain period of time or a certain amount of money, and only a portion of one's salary. I don't
Okay,
recall the
so if I
all the
recall
details.
correctly, it was 8 weeks. Now it's 12 weeks or something like that, and you received an X amount part of your salary.
Right.
And if you were a state employee or a public employee, you used your vacation time, and then you could use your sick time also. I think we were the first or the second in the nation to do the bill. The business community clearly wanted to have a conversation about the bill, and which is where the 25 and below became part of that. Now it's excluded in the new bill. I believe that now everybody is included.
Did you do the negotiating with the business community or just with the
I
legislature?
did not do the negotiation with the business community. That would have been, well, the Senate President to some degree. Julie Cashin from our office did some of it with NJBIA. Actually, the governor, I think it was the governor actually who did some of that. With them. And then, you have to sell it. The 21st vote was Nick Sacco.
Well, without a smile on your face, I think you're taking some credit for that.
I don't take credit for anything. Bill Baroni voted for the bill as his commitment as he would, and Bill always, when he said he was going to vote for something, voted for it. But Nick was the 21st vote.
Are those your proudest moments? The
School formula funding
and
school formula funding and the $3.4 billion for school construction.
The school construction bills. Yeah. Huh. Okay, that must have been a hard sell as well.
So when you talk, that was extremely hard, and we had to change. What we had wanted was the match of 30 or 35 to 40%. So that the state put in, the city or region put in 60%, and the state would put in 40%. So you would go on a bond initiative. I think our original goal was to try to keep it at 30, but we couldn't.
Okay.
We had to do 40.
But it ended up creating an awful lot of new schools as well as rebuilding and refurbishing of old ones.
But probably the reason why Governor Corzine was emphatic about doing is he went to Oliver School with Al Catino, which is in the East Ward in Newark. And it is a school that I think was 1918, 1920, and children of disabilities were working out of closets. He came out, he was like, not happening. Became our goal.
What are the other major accomplishments of the administration?
We did needle exchange. We did, marriage equality at that point, which was really civil unions. We were one of the few states, I think Governor Corzine easily would have done marriage equality. Those are, I think, some of our bigger moments that people don't even realize. Site remediation. There's a new bill out this year, again, to now look at what's been passed and doing it. I think some of the sad stuff was a little bit of difficulty from legislators to understand, to trust, and to give certain things a chance. I think that's one of the things I look back at.
What specific, aside from asset monetization, are there particular other disappointments?
Well, I think, not really. Listen, I look at the cap bill, which people applauded Governor Christie on, and, we are the persons who did the cap bill. We did it at 4%. We probably would have liked to have done it less, but
Explain
we
what
couldn't.
that means.
The cap, and how much money you spend, your budget to cap it at a certain amount.
School districts and municipalities?
Right. And county. Counties were announced. I don't know if counties ultimately were in the bill that got done. And ultimately, not the bill that got done, the bill that was sunsetted. Ultimately, under Governor Christie, everybody agreed, not everybody, people went to a stronger cap in that. It's really not.
Okay.
Just something I think about, like, why couldn't we have done it a little bit differently? And I'm not saying the cap is a right and a wrong, and I don't think, again, you have to try stuff to see if it works. I think that the criticism that we got, the difficulty we got in doing the bill the first time to try to say, let's cap it at 4, let's look around, let's sunset it, let's see where we're at. It's funny when I see another administration do it with not a whole lot of criticism. I find it interesting at a stronger level. I just found that interesting. So.
Well, maybe you blazed the trail so that it made it
I
easier.
don't know
for
if
the
it
next
blazed
one.
the trail or not, but we'll see.
So you spent a year in the employ of Congressman Menendez. You spent a year in the employ of Senator Corzine.
Just about, right.
But you spent 3 years in the government.
And I wish I would have stayed the last year. I think I regretted not doing that.
Why did you leave?
I was tired. I have my mother at that point was in her late 80s. She lived in Hudson. We had we had a couple of incidents. We had the blood on the brain and then a broken hip. And I have one sister, and felt, it was time to maybe put in a lot of time. You're on 24/7. It's, and I think more people read into it. I mean, there were times the governor and I clearly had collusion courses, and people knew it.
You want to talk about them?
No. I love him, and he knows that. But I pick and choose my fights, and I am somebody that likes to sort of believe that you can talk your way through a lot of stuff. Talk meaning communicate and figure stuff out, and you pick and choose the major stuff that I think that you do.
And what did you go to do?
I went there for school formula funding.
No. I mean, what did you leave to do?
I went and became a lobbyist.
At Princeton Public Affairs?
Yes, I
did.
did.
Okay.
I did. I went and became a lobbyist at Princeton Public Affairs.
And did you work on the Corzine re-election campaign?
I volunteered. I did not.
So not in an official capacity?
No. I volunteered and helped with some of the field and that.
Were you burned out?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I was tired. I mean, I think we had a very small staff. It was a decision that the Corzine group made, that not me, but to have a really small staff, and that meant a lot of extra work. Where people had 3-4 people work for them, I had 1-2 people at most. Beyond the scheduler and that, but to handle legislative matters, to handle meetings and things like that. So yeah, I was tired, and it was time to do something else.
And you've been doing that ever since with
I have been
the
a
lobbying
lobbyist.
group in Trenton.
Yes, Princeton Public Affairs Group. I've been with them since 2009, so it is 10 years. Yeah,
That's the longest you've been anywhere, isn't it?
Right, it's true. No, I was with John Corzine for 10 years, and I was with Bob
okay.
for 10 years. 10 years of doing consulting work and things like that.
Right.
So that's,
But I'm talking about a full-time job now. Is it?
Oh, political consultant is a full-time job.
Okay.
No, I've been there, and I've enjoyed it. I have wonderful colleagues, and I enjoy what I do, and that, so.
And have you been involved in any formally involved in any political campaign since?
No.
Why?
I just, I sort of decided it's over, I just, you get lucky, right? You get to work for people that you really like and respect, and you don't always have to agree with that person. So by 2009, I was tired. I have friends who'll call me on stuff, I'll answer political questions, I'll give them advice. Politics has changed a lot. It's more analytical. It's like in baseball, it's more analytical, and it's, let's go back and look at this, and this is the way you do stuff. Not a lot of communication, not a lot of let's sort of figure a middle ground. And I feel like I live in New Jersey that people don't want to figure out a middle ground. It's either this way or that, and that's the way it is. And so I think it's hard for someone like me to want to be in the political world then. I mean, that's my personal view.
Is it a matter of how politics has changed in the years since you were involved in it, or is it that politics, or at least politics at the level that you were dealing with it, is really a young person's game? It's
a young person's game, and look, and I was older when I did it. I was like in 30s and 40s. I mean, it is that. It's a younger person's game, but my style I don't feel like I have a style that fits into today's world, okay? I feel like my style is much more different. Like, I bet you if I was to ask legislators now, tell me, like, do you know who is Paul Moriarty's favorite baseball team? Would they know? It's the Boston Red Sox.
Well, it happens to be my favorite team as well.
Okay. Well, my favorite team is the New York Mets.
I know that because I read it in your biography.
Right, but unless you read my biography, but there are legislators like Paul Moriarty knows that about me, and there's other legislators. It's how much time are you vesting in to know that person better.
And there's really very little difference, it seems to me, or it sounds like, between what you're doing now as a lobbyist and what you did as a legislative liaison, if you will, in the Corzine administration.
Right. I mean, again, you have to know your issues. I mean, to be a good lobbyist, you have to know your issues. And I believed the position that I had I needed to make sure that I was going to do the best job that I could, right? That's something that was ingrained into my father. You know, you do the best job you can. So that meant understanding policy as well as I think I ended up understanding it.
And understanding the politics.
Right.
Okay.
Which gets you the ability to do the good policy.
So let's talk a little generally about John Corzine, about his management style, his personality, how he related to you and to others on the staff. How would you describe his management policy? Was it top down? Was it bottom up? Was it collegial?
Collegial, yes. We had staff meetings every day, senior staff. So that was the chief of staff.
With him?
With him.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, policy director Heather. That was Heather Howard. Brad Abelow used to join us, I believe.
He was treasurer.
He was treasurer.
at the
Then he
time?
became chief of staff, but as treasurer because
Right.
because Brad was new to he was really much part of our every day. And that would be Stu, or then Ed, or Ken, depending on the player.
I wouldn't be surprised if Dick Leone had something to do with that. Stressing to Corzine and to Abelow the critical importance that he placed on the position of state treasurer.
Yes, and what Brad Abelow allowed me to do was to hire somebody to work with him that worked with me. So that I could, because I can't, I needed a mature person who I knew and trusted, who could protect him, but also protect all of us as we went through this process. And so, and Brad was kind enough to allow me to make that hire. So Corzine was always present. Okay, these were his staff meetings, not ours. They were his. And his expectations are we start at 8 o'clock or 8:30. I think it was 8 o'clock, and that's how it was going to be. Listen, I've always believed John Corzine was approachable, so I never felt he wasn't approachable. If I had a disagreement with him, I'd have a disagreement with him in the meeting or personally, right? But I think that's what he wanted. He didn't want people that were going to agree with him all the time, and so I always felt. Look, I've said this to people over and over again. You could ask John Corzine a budget question. He could answer a budget question. He knew what line half the budget stuff was on. He drove us crazy. He would sit there on the budget and go line by line. He knew a lot. He cared enough. And believed, I remember him telling me this, when I said something about school formula funding, about doing a whole bunch of events or whatever, and he looked at me and said, no, that's what I get paid for. I'm the governor. I'm supposed to do these things. I'm not supposed to take all kinds of sort of thank yous or whatever. And I think that always was sort of part of who we unfortunately were not, because I don't think people understood the things like school formula funding that he did.
Did he not do a very good job of going out and selling the things that he did?
He didn't. And that's on us. That's on us too, us staff. No, he didn't. He didn't. And when the accident, as you know, occurred, that just took so much time away, and rightfully so in the sense of his own rehabbing and stuff like that. But no, he didn't. He should have sold school formula funding for like 6 months.
Did you encourage him to do so?
We all did. We all did. You win battles and you lose battles. You know that.
I do, and I'm wondering whether it wasn't in his nature to go around and brag about what he did.
That's it. That's exactly it. It wasn't in his nature. You elected him. He's the governor. He's supposed to do these things. You're supposed to have government that works. Yes.
Sounds to me as though you think he was a very good governor and not a very good campaigner.
I think John Corzine was a very good governor, and when people stop and see the things that he accomplished and the things that he led, I think they'll understand better. I think he wasn't a campaigner. Like, that's just not who he is. Nothing wrong with that, though. Nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't who he really, I believe, was. And
would that be one reason why you think that he probably should have remained a United States Senator? That he was more temperamentally suited to be a United States Senator than governor?
Listen, I don't know about the temper. I just always thought the Senate was a great fit for him, because I thought that, it just was a good fit for him. Listen, I'm very proud of having worked for him. And as I said to you, I wish I would have thought about staying one more year. I just think I was so tired at that point. You know, you come off of a campaign, you come right in, you're doing 7 days a week. You know, legislators call you on Sundays, call you on Saturdays, you know, hey, you know.
So did the governor, I assume.
Yes, he did. And so, you know, I always hope that people would go back and understand a little bit more John Corzine, who he is. The one thing that I've let legislators know this, who know me very well, I think the comments about Corzine not being available or approachable are a bunch of BS, okay? As a person who sat there outside his office, first of all, they had 24 access for me, which for a lot of them, that was great because they could have conversations about legislation that they wanted or things that they want to talk to. But he saw them. He wasn't a big caller. He would make calls, but that wasn't who he was. But he was approachable. That sort of conversation that he wasn't approachable and he wasn't, I love them, but that's BS. That's BS.
Why did he lose re-election?
Because he didn't, most people, I think why he won, because people trusted him. I think people lost trust because they didn't really know all the things that he had done. And I'm not so sure that Democrats worked as hard as they could have or should have. Right?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that they didn't.
Right. And that includes stakeholders, you know, unions and others who did a lot for that potentially could have done more for him.
Well, what should I have asked you that I didn't? What thoughts do you have about your time in the Corzine administration that you have been dying to tell people, but you didn't get the opportunity?
I think the only thing that I have always been dying for people to understand is all the things that John Corzine really did and all the work he put in.
Well, you've put in a lot of work just sitting here and answering our questions.
Thank you very much.